I feel like we should have like the Times Square countdown thing or something.
Live from the Plutopia News Network, this is the Plutopia Happy Hour. Our guests tonight are Ben Marks and Marty Hahn of the Rock Poster Society. The not ready for cable news players are here. Our foreign correspondent Maggie Duvall in Taos. I'm Scoop Sweeney, and that guy over there, that's John Lebkowski. Hello, John.
Hey, I'm right over here. Yeah, we're really happy to have Ben and Marty here. Ben is currently with Collectors Weekly. Marty's a semi-retired cabinet maker and president of the Rock Poster Society, and they share a love of rock posters, as do we. And this does not mean like posters with pictures of obsidian and granite.
Right. Did we lose Marty?
Oh, yeah, Marty disappeared.
Yeah, I think, I bet you though, there have been, I've seen posters, rock posters that have rocks on them. So, you know.
I have some bricks behind me.
Yes, I see.
Here he comes.
Here comes Marty back.
Right on.
Okay.
Yeah, so tell us, as we're waiting for Marty to get ramped up again,
Sure.
Ben, you shared with us a little bit of your story, how you got involved in the Rock Poster Society, but why don't you share with our audience?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you know, I always loved music as a kid. And my mom, to her credit, would take me to the San Francisco Museum of Art and other museums and, you know, introduce me to contemporary art at the time, which was in the 60s. And so I always loved art. And we had, we had lots of stuff in our house. And so when I saw the rock posters, you know, as a kid, it was just like, oh, here's my two favorite things, visual art and, you know, references to music and bands I love. So it was just, you know, I just always gravitated to them from that point, that early point. And then as I got into the visual arts world for a while, I realized after I was kind of done with that, that I like rock posters better almost, not even almost, because it wasn't like they were just art about art, or that they could just rest on their laurels as being art, or whoever the name of the artist was. They had to do something. They had to, like, you know, convey information and, you know, sell tickets or, you know, whatever it is. So I liked the idea of art that kind of earned its keep, you know, and just posters in general and rock posters in particular. So that's kind of how I have always looked at it, and I've kind of never really looked at it very differently. I just like art that earns its keep.
Mm-hmm.
How about you, Marty?
Yeah, I had my, you know, small stash from back in the day, and for me, you know, the art and the music were always kind of two sides of the same coin. And you know, Ben and I grew up in Northern California, so if you went to concerts, you were around posters from, you know, from our early teens, and the posters were always, you know, you'd go to somebody's house and, you know, their brother just came back from San Francisco and just went to the show, and here's the poster up on the wall. And they just kind of had this magical quality, you know, they were like these historical documents that were speaking, reflecting our culture, saying graphically what the music in our ears was saying. You know, it was almost like, you know, the guys that couldn't play guitar picked up pens, you know, and if they could do art, they would reflect the same idea, the same kind of aesthetic in their own way. Mm-hmm. And you know, another thing too, we all grew up with vinyl LPs. So, you know, when you bought new music, you had a 12 by 12 piece of art that, right, you know, hopefully, you know, said, you know, if you buy this record, this is what's inside.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on the vinyl LPs. If you look, but over here, the wall has a little bit of my vinyl collection. I loved it just because, you know, I have a lot of CDs, but they just weren't the same experience as having this big thing that you could put the record on and be listening to it and reading the notes on the back. You could look at the cover, and it was a much more vital experience than just, you know, having this plastic thing that was really small and you really couldn't enjoy the album art like you could on a big vinyl record.
And if you were lucky, you'd had a vinyl record that opened up.
Oh, yes.
And then you could clean your pot on it, and
Right.
Yeah, that as well. It was a multi-purpose
yes, exactly.
device
Yeah.
there.
Sometimes they'd have a poster inside.
There you
and
go.
all
Yeah.
that.
Yep.
Yeah. That
Yep.
was my favorite part of commercial art class in 1981 was designing an album cover. That was a project. Yeah. And I won a first prize on that. So yeah.
But if you look at some of the album covers, it's not just quirky stuff. There's a lot of fine art that went into some of these album covers. Groups like Pink Floyd, Yes, and some of those people really went all out in finding good artists to do their covers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and it was trippy stuff. It was very absorbing because there was often a lot of like detail incorporated and just album covers, of course, and also in rock posters. I'm wondering though, do you guys know the history of those posters? Like, when did that start? When did they start making posters that were not just words on paper, but really works of art?
Well, it really started with in 1965 when the Charlatans went up to Virginia City, Nevada, and had a residency there. Two of the band members created a poster that is now called The Seed because it basically, the whole poster scene sprang from that. And then in January '66, when the Fillmore and Avalon started, Bill Graham, Chet Helms, the people producing the shows wanted posters to advertise. They were trying to sell tickets.
Right.
And they wanted something that would speak to the audience that was going to come and see these bands. So it really kind of started there, and they got so popular that they were being ripped off of telephone poles and store windows pretty much as soon as they went up, because they were just kind of a phenomenon.
Do you think there's any chance that any of those poster artists were taking hallucinogenic drugs?
No.
I can't imagine that to be the case. No.
I think there's a small chance. Yeah.
Well, when you were talking about the Charlatans, wasn't that was it the Red Dog Saloon?
The Red Dog, I meant.
Yeah. That's cool. I forgot about that.
Yeah, that's Dan Hicks and all those people that.
Yeah, he was their drummer.
Yeah. Well, the whole thing with the posters, originally they were just kind of disposable. Nobody really cared about them until after the show was over, until they became really good looking and trippy. And I had this friend that worked for Bill Graham at the original BGP offices in the Tenderloin, and he told me that they had pallets full of old posters, and they were just sitting there, and he was owed some money for shows he did at he didn't get paid for it. He argued with someone, and they just gave him a whole bunch. He said, just take a bunch of posters. They're probably worth something. So he got a huge stack of them and funded his lifestyle for like the next 10 years from just selling off these posters. And they were great ones. I mean, they were in perfect condition, had never been on the streets. They were just right off the pallet from BGP. And I asked the guy, well, could you spare some? He said, no, that's my nest egg.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were hippie capital for sure. I heard that Bill Graham used to keep a stack of them in the trunk of his car.
Oh,
and
yeah.
He would pay people when he wanted favors and handfuls of posters.
Well, in that area and in that business, that's legal tender.
No, it's legal barter, whatever works. And hopefully people kept them.
Well, I know I did. My studio here, I have it with some of my favorite posters, and I have a bunch in storage because I'm just afraid to bring them out in the light of day and see them fade.
What's interesting about that Charlatans poster you just put up, there were actually two versions of it. What's unlike the Bill Graham model where he would have his printer order paper by the railroad carload because they were printing so many posters. There were very few of these things printed, and the printing methods were no better than your local copy place, or whatever was happening in 1965, mimeograph place, I should say. So that's why some of these pieces are really, really rare. Once the scene took off in the way Marty was describing, where people were collecting them and going to shows to get the poster for the next week's show and that sort of thing, then they were printing thousands and thousands and thousands. And so it becomes an issue of value and scarcity and all that.
When did they start? When did it start becoming more like high quality printing? When did that start kicking in?
Well, it kind of happened in the mid 90s. After the Fillmore Avalon era ended, around 71, the poster thing kind of tailed off. The promoters were using different ways to advertise shows. Like in Bill Graham's case, he went to print media. It was always, a hassle to work with artists and get posters printed and take them up and around. He could do the same thing by just making a call to the San Francisco Chronicle and getting a full page ad with all of his upcoming shows. Right. So the poster thing kind of went away for a while as advertising. And then but the interest in them was always there. It may have waned a bit, but suddenly in the mid 90s, you had kind of a DIY, basement things start to happen where these artists whose, friends were in bands just decided to make their own, self-generated, let's do a poster for the show for these friends of ours. Right. And they could silk screen, themselves at home. And just, there were no rules. They could do anything they wanted. They could give the band a handful, maybe sell a few, get their money back, don't get their money back. It was just a cool thing to do. Right. And a lot of, a bunch of other people kind of took notice, and suddenly the whole scene was revived. But it was a whole different, a different model. These weren't being done for promoters. Right. These were being done either, by or at the direction of the bands, right, or just, something that was being done for the fans.
Yeah, there was some great stuff in the Bay Area. I know just walking around in San Francisco or even Oakland, you could see all these amazing posters made by the bands. I have one right over here, my friend's No Sisters, which was a fairly popular new wavy punkish band in the late 70s, early 80s, and they did some great stuff. And a lot of the stuff that was from the 80s, new wave groups had some very trippy posters, and it was all, generated by the bands. They might actually hire an artist, but a lot of times they were just screwing around with their photographs and whatever they came up with as a design. But you saw a lot of really interesting stuff just stapled to telephone poles.
Mm-hmm. It kind of went along with the band's business models too, because back in the day they got their money from record sales, right? And after a certain point, that's not where their revenue comes from. It comes from touring, selling tickets and merch.
Yep.
Right. Yeah.
And one of the big things for merch is, hey, let's we've got a tour coming up. Let's call some artists up and get some posters made that we can sell at the shows.
Yeah,
so suddenly you got these, small batch, archivally printed, signed and numbered, handcrafted items.
Well, now that I think of it,
they're hugely popular.
Now that I think of it, when I was in the Bay Area, it was late 80s through the mid 90s. And I was, in the kind of Gilman Street scene at that time. And now that I think of it too, desktop publishing was starting to come into its own, and the internet and everything. So you had more people with access to, what was Adobe InDesign? What was it back then? Back in the old days, what was a PageMaker? Yeah. PageMaker. Yeah. A lot of people had access to PageMaker, and some were inspired by the scene, inspired by the bands. Just, people doing a lot of it out of a labor of love, and just inspired by it. Always fascinated me. And it was one of the things I was going to ask you guys about, is that whole process, why some artists are just how an artist and a band will just continue to like kind of feed off each other, and like how that happens or why that happens, or any thoughts on that? It's just fascinating to me.
Well, the famous, or maybe not famous, case is Jim Pollock, who does a lot of posters for Fish, and it turned out that he was the keyboard player's roommate, in college when the band was being formed. So their connection goes back to the formation of the band, and Pollock was studying art and Page was studying music, and so they've been doing posters for as long as Fish has been around. But Fish, of course, tours so constantly that one artist can't do everything for them, and so they've got a whole stable of people who they call. Yeah.
What's I can talk. What's the most expensive poster that's been made that's gone at auction or collected or whatever? I'm not talking very clearly tonight, but I think you get my drift.
The highest one I've seen was Beatles at Shea Stadium. And this is just, what they call a boxing style in general, just not particularly artistic poster.
Right.
And what was it? Some 140 some thousand?
Yeah, well, one of the Grateful Dead skeleton roses that Kelly and Mouse did, I think, sold for 126 recently.
In perfect condition.
Yeah, in perfect condition.
Oh
which is and that's a unicorn. They just don't exist in perfect condition.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, that's more of the standard music poster before the ones that we're talking about, because a lot of the R&B circuit, they had houses in Nashville and New Orleans and Houston. That's all they did was those big block posters. It just had the art, name of the venue, the artist, the date, and not a lot of artwork. But you'd see those all over the place. They were just how you get people out to the shows, and that's where those artists made their money. They didn't sell a lot of records, but they sold a lot of tickets at bars and nightclubs and theaters.
Mm-hmm. Right, and the promoter wanted lots of publicity as cheap as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is there overlap now with like I have a folder full of all of these rave posters that I collected from the late 80s, early 90s, and I mean they're stunning, they're gorgeous. I mean, are people starting? Is it moving into that at all, or is that kind of a separate collector thing?
What I know about it is that it's a particular market. It generally, there's a couple of websites that do auctions regularly, like a few times a year, that are just devoted to rock and roll posters. And that stuff doesn't do, when I've seen it come up, that stuff doesn't do as well as, the mainstream rock and roll 60s, 70s stuff. But I'd be stunned if there weren't collectors out there who are looking for that particular thing.
Right.
Yeah.
I wonder if posters are being associated with NFTs.
I hope not.
Non-fungible tokens. I'll bet they are. I mean, they're doing it with the baseball cards.
I always thought the attractiveness was that that it's something that you could, hold in your hand, something tangible.
Yeah, there are contemporary rock poster artists who are doing NFTs, and they're pretty unapologetic about it, and that's fine. I'm with Marty. I like the physical nature. I mean, I just got a poster in the mail today, and the living room smells like ink.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's the beauty of posters is it's something that tangible that you hold in your hands, put on the wall or put on the frame or whatever that you will enjoy. Yeah, I had the good fortune of moving out of radio into managing bands in the Bay Area in the 80s and 90s, and did a lot of shows. But these posters that we created, we weren't really posters, they're handbills. That's what most, if you're not a famous band and you're playing the nightclubs and the theaters, you're handing out handbills. And there's only one reason for that. You want people to come in and buy your tickets. That's where you get your money. But I saw over the years some beautiful ones, and they were all over just stapled to walls and stuck under people's windshield wipers.
Yeah.
And that was a whole different art form, but some of the stuff I saw was just amazing. But yeah, I doubt if it was collectible.
Again, maybe not at the time, but I'd be stunned if there weren't people who were highly interested in some of that material, depending on where the show was, who the band was. I mean, those two variables can make a huge difference in whether something's considered collectible or not, which of course is different than whether something's good or not.
Yeah, I can kick myself.
It's somebody's nostalgia. Somebody's got memories there, and a lot of times you get to a certain age and you start to look for the trinkets of your youth.
Yeah, I threw out a couple of posters or handbills that I had for Metallica before they were ever signed. We all played on the same circuits in the Bay Area, and I had them, and they were sitting around the office for a long time. I tossed them out. They're probably actually worth something because this was just before they got their big break.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that, my daughter's almost 25 and she's like a millennial Gen Z cusp, but she identifies more with Gen Z. And what's great about the Gen Zers, because I think about collectors and you're talking about the nostalgia, but there's this like wished for nostalgia that the Gen Zers have. They want all that paper stuff. They're like over the digital stuff, they're fine with social media and all that, like second nature, but it's like it's boring, it has no meaning. And so I think it's really interesting how many young people I'm seeing that are collecting this kind of work. You've already seen it with collecting vinyl, now collecting mixtapes, wanting typewriters, stuff like that.
We see it too. We do a big show in San Francisco every year in Golden Gate Park, and we've got all the old guys and all the younger guys, the artists,
right,
and the dealers who have all the old vintage 60s stuff, and it just, you can walk around the room and ages from 20 to 80,
right, yeah,
and you look at just walls of posters, from the 60s to something that was printed last week, and you really see it as kind of a living legacy.
Mm-hmm.
And an art form unto itself, and we all those of us who are really into it like to celebrate it.
Mm-hmm.
Get everybody together and get people as lit up by it as we are.
Yeah. I found people of that generation are really into analog. One kid that was a friend of one of my grandchildren, found out that I had a whole bunch of VHS tapes, all in perfect condition, and really wanted to offer me whatever. It's like no. Yeah, I'm addicted to analog, I guess. I have VHS, I have cassette tapes, vinyl, 45 RPM, and I just like to roll around on them, I guess.
My daughter is obsessed with old cheesy 80s trading videos on VHS, for how to work at Burger King or whatever. Speaking of my daughter again, I keep bringing up my daughter, but she's an artist. She's a 2D animator, and she's on this quest. I want to tie this into the rest of the world embracing rock poster art as an authentic art form, to be celebrated, not just a collectible kind of thing, but, she's frustrated because so many people it's animation's just for kids. It's like, no, it's not. You don't understand. This is like a beautiful art form and all that. So can you talk a little bit about that and some of the work you've done through the organization, or otherwise to kind of spread the word and how we can help as well to, kind of change the consciousness, where it's been, maybe where it's going.
Thank Ben.
Well, I mean, we do a couple shows a year that are, kind of at their core trying to do what you're talking about, which is to, present rock posters as a legitimate art form as well as a niche collectible. It seems to be both.
Mhm.
And so we do a smaller show that's just artists only in the summer. This is all before COVID, but we're going to ramp up again this year. And then we do this larger show that's open to artists and dealers in the fall, in October. And I believe the date for that is October 15. So those two events are about giving collectors a chance to buy stuff and giving sellers a chance to sell stuff. And that's true. But they're also about this kind of community that Marty was talking about. And we get a lot of people coming to the shows. And then, you start to see curators at more mainstream museums paying a little bit more attention. And, in San Francisco now, there's organization called the Haight Street Arts Center that's starting to do some pretty interesting shows, and they'll do rock. I happened to be there this afternoon or this morning, and they'll do rock posters from the 60s downstairs, and then upstairs there'll be an exhibition of farm worker protest posters that were created around the same time.
Wow.
And so you start seeing where some of the influences were bouncing off of each other. But again, it's a legitimate form of art, legitimate form of expression. And as far as animation, I mean, I think that animation doesn't have anything to prove. I mean, a really good example is Illustrator art was for a long time the collectors didn't pay much attention to it.
Mhm.
And so like old Saturday Evening Post covers, the original art for that,
Right.
and now that's a huge sector of the fine art market, the illustrations for a lot of these magazines. So I
Right.
don't think it's much of a leap to look at an artist like Stanley Mouse or Victor Moscoso or David Singer, who are still with us from the 60s, and to see that, yeah, they're gonna, at one point or another, if they haven't already, gonna get that same kind of acclaim.
Mhm.
Yeah, the magazine art you were talking about, Norman Rockwell, that was like the big dog of that kind of illustration.
Yeah, and people collect a lot of J.C. Leyendecker, I believe is his name. Huge, following for that guy's work. So yeah, there's those names to those collectors are every bit as important as the names I just uttered to people like me and Marty.
Right. Right.
For a long time, there's been kind of an attitude among the fine art community that this wasn't anything to consider. It was hippie sex and drug stuff. It's not real art. But in retrospect, it's gotten a lot more respect. In the last 20 years, a number of museums have done retrospective shows, especially in 2017 when they had they would do something for the 50th anniversary of the Summer of Love.
Yeah.
Right.
And poster
Right.
art suddenly became front and center again.
Right.
Yeah, when I was in college in the early 60s, that's, I'm showing my age there, I would hang out in the local beatnik hangouts. And the posters then were from the 20s and 30s in Paris. There were many great poster artists, and some of those things, I actually still have a few somewhere, but they were amazing. And I really don't see any of that anymore, but I may just be I don't hang out in the beatnik clubs anymore.
Right.
And a lot of that earlier work, especially the stuff from the Viennese secessionists and the Art Nouveau period, Mucha, a whole bunch of artists from Paris in the 1890s. That became very inspirational for a lot of the rock poster artists in San
Right.
Francisco, in particular, in the 1960s. And so again, this model of mass-produced printed material of some sort, advertising something else that's art. In those cases, it was usually a performance by a singer or a dancer, or
Right.
the can or something like that. Yeah, there's a lot of precedent for what happened in San Francisco and the rest of the United States in the 60s.
Yeah, you can draw a direct line. It wasn't until printing techniques really developed in the late 19th century that suddenly regular people could have art on their walls.
Right.
And that was the idea. You could advertise something and have somebody put it up on their wall.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think with rock posters, it was kind of the same thing. I mean, it was meant to be displayed and appreciated as something artistic and fun. And the lettering was weird, so you had to spend some time to try and figure out what the heck it said.
All right.
The other thing that's interesting about that is, somebody earlier said, posters of high quality. And, Marty started talking about the silkscreen stuff that came around in the late 90s. But, if you talk to the printers who were doing these 4-color offsets in the 60s, using offset printing machines, printing one color at a time, which is very similar to how which is exactly
Right.
how a screen print is done.
Right.
Those people will tell you that it was really this kind of gift that the ubiquity of 4-color printing machines, they were still really expensive in the late 60s, if you could find one. And so, people were doing really highly sophisticated technical work with one color at a time,
Right.
offset printing.
Right.
And
Having
so,
to think through it. Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so it was really, it was something, yeah, anyway.
Well, when the Mac computer and color printers came about, that revolutionized, the ease of printing. It may not have, been as great as a really fine silk screen, but when I was having to, do posters, when I got my hands on a Mac and a color printer, it's like,
Right.
it was, it was the best thing since sliced bread. It's like I didn't have to get the little transfer letters and border tape that you had to do if you wanted to have a nice border, and you had to go down and try to get it Xeroxed and hope that it actually came through without looking like crap. And it usually did look like crap unless you spent a lot of time doing it. But the Mac just made it easy.
Well, the piece directly behind me was composed on a Mac with Mac Paint.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
You see all the pixels, and you can see all the pixels in there.
Well, I just wanted to just quickly return to what you were talking about, Ben, with the, illustration like Saturday Evening Post and all that, because one of my friends that I made, I co-created and produced an event called the Showdown at Unobtainium, Tesla versus Edison. And I was looking for somebody to do a poster. And a friend of mine that I'd officiated her wedding way back when, she used to own a comic book store in Santa Fe, go figure. She said, "You have to meet my friend Mark Wheatley, who's an amazing artist. Have you ever seen any of his work?"
No.
But I'm going to share the poster here that he did for us. But what I love about, can you see that okay?
Oh,
I
yeah.
remember
Oh,
that
yeah.
so well.
Right. And I love this. And I still have a stack of 100 of these that are signed by him in primo condition. But what's great about Mark is when you follow his page, he's continually showing you work from these illustrators from like 100 and on, to now, years ago, Saturday Evening Post and everything. And you really see the complexity of all that. So, and as you said about, you can draw that direct line. I know exactly what you're talking about because some of the stuff he's shared has been incredible. So anyway, yeah. So, what was that other? Oh, I wanted to talk about how cool it was that you guys supported so many artists during COVID. Could you tell us a little bit more about your efforts in that department to help out these poster artists?
Well, a few years ago, we started an effort we call the Trips Artist Relief Trust. It was essentially a way to just stash some money aside to help out, you know, our artist friends when, you know, in a time of dire need. We kind of went through it with you know, one of our favorite artists who became very ill, and we, you know, ran around hustling, doing fundraisers, doing anything we could to help. And you know, and just decided, wouldn't it be better if we did something where we just kept the money away from our general fund, set it aside for an express purpose, and it's there. And we, you know, somebody gets sick, somebody has an accident, something bad happens, we can be there to offer at least some modest help quickly. And we've funded it by commissioning posters that we sell at our you know, Golden Gate Park show every year, and we just put all the proceeds into this fund.
And the artists who do the posters, they do the designs for free.
Awesome.
Right. So I mean, our you know, our whole mantra is we work for the artists. We're here volunteering. Nobody in Trips gets paid. We volunteer our time to, you know, to help these guys, because the more you do for the artists, the more you do to help everybody else.
Mhm.
And over time, we've built, you know, relationships and partnerships, you know, so to speak, with these folks. And the idea of this series of the Artist Relief Trust posters is the artists giving back, you know, to the overall community.
Right. Right.
You know, and we love it as an ongoing thing. It kind of it gets all the artists vesting in the success of our venture,
Right. Yeah.
because, you know, it's a way to do for each other. It's a way to bring, you know, all the artists physically together. You know, guys who work in isolation most of the year and don't see people that, you know, that aren't on a computer screen.
Right.
You know, not just selling product online, but actually, you know, sitting down at a table, having fans come up, shaking hands, talking,
Right.
signing stuff for them, just talking about, you know, inspiration, how they came up with a certain idea, and you know, and this has really brought the poster fans together too. I mean, we have people traveling in from all over for that fall show. It's kind of like, I mean, it's Poster Gate Christmas.
Oh yeah, I'd sure like to come. So
The other thing
see
that's
what I can
cool,
do.
the other thing that's cool about it is you get some of these, you know, newer generation artists, and they get to like hang out and talk and share war stories and notes with some of their idols, you know.
Right.
And you know, because, you know, some of the artists from the 60s who are still with us, you know, they're at our shows too. So there's that kind of synergy that happens as well, which you know, for a lot of these younger artists, I mean, the old guard, they're their heroes.
Right. Right.
You
Yeah.
guys mentioned flat stock earlier at South by Southwest.
Yeah.
Before we started the session, have you been there before? Do you know much about it?
I've personally been to a few. How about you, Marty?
I've never been to a flat stock show. I should, you know, one of these years I've been, you know, meaning to get out there. We know a lot of the people there. We worked, flat stock is done by the American Poster Institute, API, and they're essentially, you know, artists producing these shows for themselves.
Right.
It's really a huge event.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, it's fun.
I recall going to one flat stock where Gilbert Shelton was speaking or being interviewed. And that was, you know, I mean, a chance to hear Gilbert Shelton talk about his art. I think he lives in France now, and he's not really around very much. But I just happened to see a picture of this year's flat stock, and apparently there was a huge number of people displaying art there, and I guess they're selling posters too.
Yeah, we actually co-produced a flat stock show a few years ago.
Oh,
the very
great.
first flat stock show was actually in San Francisco.
Ah.
Oh, wow.
And for their 25th show, they wanted to come back out. So we co-produced it with API and, you know, put everyone up at the Hall of Flowers and had a bunch of the folks who, usually do our shows, and a lot of faces that normally are only seen out in Austin or Chicago or Seattle. And so it was just it was a nice mix. It was a one-off. It was fun.
Yeah, yeah. And with Flatstock, it's not just rock and roll. It's, you've got a lot of movie stuff happening. You've got a lot of, sci-fi and fan fiction type stuff going on. And it tends to be more graphic. It tends to be more graphic arts with a capital G than most rock posters seem, or at least the ones I gravitate to, are more sort of illustrator based.
Well, when people collect things like real estate, the key is location, location, location. And with collecting things like records or posters, I believe the key word is condition, condition, condition. Is that true these days?
Yeah, condition is everything, especially with the old stuff, the vintage stuff.
Yeah.
Who
I would say
determines?
the other thing though is edition size, because there's a lot of artists are doing posters. They'll do a poster for a band, and then they'll do some variants on different kinds of paper on much smaller edition size. So like the run might be 500 to 1,000, but the variants might be in the tens or single digits, or 50 tops, and so contrived scarcity is also a factor.
Right.
Who determines the what is excellent and what is not excellent? I mean, is there a grading scale? Is there a universal body that says it's this and nothing else?
Yeah, everybody likes, everybody's got their own taste.
Well, no, he's talking about condition.
Oh,
Yeah.
condition,
Yes.
specifically.
Yeah,
Okay.
are there gods of condition who rule on what is good and what is not?
There's a company that is grading rock
Okay.
posters. They
Yeah.
started out doing baseball cards.
Yeah.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, and it's you send it out to them, pay them so much money, and they grade it, and they kind of seal it in Mylar in a sleeve kind of thing, which is a little weird.
Yeah, and so in coins, they do the same thing in coins and in baseball cards and stuff. And if you break the seal, then their designation of the quality of your whatever has been sealed is invalid. And because you could have swapped it out, right? You could have sent them one thing. It's so you don't sell something that's been graded at 9.8 when it's really a 7 because you've swapped it out.
My wife collects dolls, and the key there is mint in box.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But
Yeah,
Marty,
but-
what do you feel? How do you like that, Marty?
I had a long talk with Eric King about it. I mean, I was kind of, my mind has changed.
Enlighten me.
Well, his feeling is that what it does is gives an assurance to a buyer
Mm-hmm.
that somebody objective and professional and knowledgeable has graded this thing. So if you're spending, in the thousands of dollars for a piece sight unseen, you're going to look for something that someone has said, yes, this is an example in, authentic and in prime condition.
Mm-hmm.
And once you get it, you're not obligated to keep it in the sleeve. You can take it out and hold it in your hands and frame it, do whatever you want to do.
Right,
It's specifically to give some assurance in a sale. So I get that.
Yeah, but then if you take it out of the sleeve and frame it, you've now invalidated that, that designation, the 9.8 or the 7.2 or whatever they've done. You've invalidated it because you've broken the seal.
Yeah,
Now,
it's the same way with baseball cards.
But so what? Now you get to enjoy it.
Right. Right.
What's the point of buying something and keeping it in the package in the shrink wrap?
Yeah.
I mean, it's all fine if it's an investment.
Mhm.
But if you're buying, some rare record, I want to take the damn thing out and listen to it. I don't want it to just sit on a shelf somewhere.
Exactly. Yeah, I object to the record collectors who won't play the damn record because I'll go down to Antone Records here in Austin, which is a great record store, lots of vinyl, and you'll see the people in there, and they're just horrified because someone actually played this record. It's like, well, that what's the kind of the idea why it was created?
Well, if you own it, you can do whatever you want with it. And if enjoying it is kind of what you had in mind, fine. If keeping it, thinking it's going to be worth twice as much in 10 years and then selling it is your intention, more power to you.
It is kind of a funny thing, to do speculative investment in art. I mean, it just really sort of defeats the character and the purpose of art,
Mhm.
seems to me.
And there's
But I can see why people do it.
Yeah, there are some maniacs who collect. There's some guy in Rio, I believe it is, who has a huge warehouse full of vinyl albums. All he doesn't even know what they're. He just buys them by the truckload and puts them in there and never touches them. And it's
Oh
like
my God.
Well, it's like the
that's
X-Files
actually
when they hide
sinful there.
That actually sounds kind of like the record shop.
Sound
in
like a
Big
hoarder.
Spring.
Oh yeah,
Where Scoop and I came from, there was a store that was run by a couple of guys who they would buy one of every album that came out. And, they piled them up, stacked them up. Of course, they would buy multiples of the things that were selling, but they had at least one of everything. And I think when they went out of business, they had like this huge inventory. And Scoop, who was it that bought that?
Oh,
Most of that?
my friend John from Village Music in Mill Valley came out to our hometown with a big rental truck and bought everything he could cram in there. Our mutual friend Ed Ward told me about all of that. And,
Oh my God.
I used to go and trade my promotional albums to John at Village. I guess record companies don't care anymore about those vinyls, but John used to pay all of us reviewers and critics $1 credit toward good record albums. We'd take all these turkeys in, and he would give you $1 credit.
Scoop, is that the Ed Ward that was the rock critic on Fresh Air for a long time?
Yes.
Yeah.
I've got some of his posters.
May he rest in peace.
I've got some of his posters. In fact, I've got his Hunter Thompson for Sheriff poster.
Oh.
Wow.
One of my favorites.
Yeah, Ed was a great guy. He kind of shepherded me into the music critic space in the Bay Area when I moved out there and went to work as music editor at Zodiac News. And Ed was writing, I think, for Crawdaddy, and he was just a resource of anything entertainment. It didn't have to be music, movies. He had an opinion on everything, and he wasn't shy about sharing it.
I was always afraid to ask him to dinner. I was afraid to cook for him.
No. Oh, he was a food critic. Sure.
I'm interested too in I love watching like Antiques Roadshow and like these weird places you find stuff. I remember in 1975 we were up in New Hampshire, and my brother's a bass player, and he found a mint condition Thunderbird bass that had like not been played or open. It was in the original case. He got it for like $150 or something from, it was just, Grandpa Joe's like music shop, and he didn't even know what he had. So do both of you, either of you, have a really good story about a really cool poster that was discovered in some grandma's attic or something like that?
Yeah. Every once in a while, it doesn't happen that often anymore, but somebody comes up with something and it's been around forever. They don't know what they have. I got a call a few years ago from someone here in Sacramento. It's basically saying, you've got to get over here right now. And this woman and her husband went to all these concerts back in the day, in the late 60s. And she just had this sleeve that was full of vintage stuff, including some very rare ones. And
Because the print runs in Sacramento must have been smaller than San Francisco.
there were a bunch of first print Fillmores in there too. They
Oh
were
my
going to shows in
God.
San Francisco too, but there were a bunch of Sacramento things,
Yeah.
including Cream and the Grateful Dead at the Sacramento Memorial.
Oh my God.
The only
Wow.
time the Cream and the Dead ever played together, and there it was.
Yeah,
Oh
that
my
does-
And the posters
God.
were just, impossible to find. And some of them ended up in the Sacramento Rock and Radio Museum.
Dang.
And I got a few, and I helped her get a few of the higher price things into an auction. She, definitely needed some funds, had no idea what it was worth. I mean, she had a Beatles candlestick in there, first
Oh,
print,
great.
that we put in at auction. Yeah, she had no idea. She put this up on Craigslist,
Oh my God.
and my friend happened to be the first one to call. Yep, that's
Oh my
Is that it?
God.
Yeah, that's it.
Wow.
Fantastic.
Oh, yeah, that's Silver
Is
Production.
that a Jim
big
Ford
promoter.
carton?
Yeah, that's Jim Ford. He did the art, and he actually did the printing too.
Uh-huh.
Damn.
Yeah.
But it was just one of those, once in a lifetime finds.
Those are so fun. Yeah.
It was, yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where you get out of there and you're practically shaking.
Right. Right. Yeah, I just one of the people I work with happened to go into a store in Utopia, Texas, where he lives, and he wanted to stop me yesterday because he says, "May I collect vintage Western Americana books, right?" And so he said, "I found this book and I got it for you for free. It's written by this woman that I just found out about. It. Her name is Mara something or other, but it was a book about the Hopi, and it's illustrated with photographs from Edward Curtis, the famous photographer, and it's got his signature in the book. And he's going to send me this. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. I mean, this is great. So
Wow.
I love those kind of stories. So thank you for that. I also wanted to, I mean, we'll go out at the end of the show with, plugging the website too, but tell people about all the really cool options they get for joining the Rock Poster Society, because you got some goodies.
Oh, well, if you join trips, it's not expensive. You help us out a lot. You can find us at www.trps.org, and you will get our newsletter, which comes out twice a year, full color offset printed. So it's nice. There's the site, and we have a number of different T-shirts done by some pretty notable artists. And you can take your pick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's great. And the other, I have so many questions I want to ask you. So tell us a little more about, you mentioned the two shows coming up. So tell us again, it's where it is, how big it is, like paint a picture for us of what it's like beyond what you've shared already, if you wouldn't mind.
Want this, Ben?
Well, the summer show, the date hasn't been nailed down yet, but we usually hold it at Faction Brewing on Alameda.
Oh,
and,
good.
It's kind of, you're surrounded by brew tanks and pallets with lots of beer on them and stuff, and there's music going through the place. It's like half of an airplane hangar. So we usually do that, and that's free. And then in the fall, the October 15th show will be at the Hall of Flowers in Golden Gate Park, and that's basically at 9th and Lincoln. It's kind of near the part of the park where the DeYoung Museum is. It's sort of in that area.
Right.
And that goes from 10 a.m. till around 6. And we do charge admission for that. But if you're a member, admission is half price. And if you're, let's see, what else? And for when you get to the show, you take a ticket for whether you want to get in line for some of the tables where, you know, they're really impacted. Like there'll be lines in front of Emick's booth and Chuck Sperry's booth and Mark Spoosta's booth and things like that. So we try to deal with all that crowd control right from the top, but that's our big fundraiser every year. And how many square feet is the Hall of Flowers, Marty? Do you know?
It's just under 10,000.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's like,
It's the old San Francisco County Fair building.
yeah,
Okay.
it's a big room and it's a big high ceilings, and we have these big banners hanging that are like
Nice.
facsimiles of rock posters from the 60s. And, you know, and that place will be just filled with people. There'll be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people in there. And usually when we get there in the morning at 8 o'clock, there's been people who have been in line all night.
Wow.
And they're waiting to get first crack at whatever's going to be at some of the tables of those artists I mentioned a few minutes ago.
Right.
So it's a crazy scene, especially the first couple of hours. The afternoon kind of calms down a little bit, and it's, you know,
Yeah,
people,
after 3 o'clock, we just quit charging admission and you come in for free.
yeah. And if I'm at the table, sometimes it's 2:45, you know.
Sounds like the collectors are the folks that are there waiting in line for the opening, and just the fans are the one who show up later at a more convenient time.
Sure.
Yeah, and they know that at this show you will find things that you won't find anywhere else, or you know, you don't have to deal with aftermarkets or inflated eBay prices. It's really kind of special.
Yeah.
Sounds like it.
Well, for collectors, are there tips that you can give to people who want to collect this sort of thing? What should they avoid and what should they be looking for?
Oh, don't worry about money. Just go in and buy what you like. Walk around and find something cool. Talk to an artist. Make a connection, and just find something cool for your wall. Don't worry about what something is going to be worth on eBay, or you know what somebody else thinks. Just find something that speaks to you.
Yeah.
You know, you can do this. You can do this on a budget.
Yeah.
You don't have to be some high roller, you know, who has to have an absolutely 9.8 or better, you know, original 60s piece sealed in Mylar.
Do you have any sources that you recommend of poster art that's available to buy online?
Oh, there are a couple of great books. The Art of Rock and The Art of Modern Rock are both just great introductions.
Yeah.
And full of images.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's great.
There's also like a lot of auction. There's a lot of dealers who do auctions that I mentioned earlier. I think there's websites like with names like 60s posters and rockposters.com and classicposters.com. And they have, you know, full stores that are stocked, you know, depending on the day of the week with whatever inventory they've got. And then they also do these auctions a handful of times a year. You know, so there's resources like that. Eric King, Marty mentioned Eric King earlier. Eric King has a website. He's written like the definitive book, The Guide to Fillmore and Avalon, and even Vulcan Gas, I believe, posters as well. What else? There's no relation, Dennis King's d-king-gallery.com or something.
Right.
Dennis King's got a good online store. And if you're a new buyer, those sites can be useful just to kind of get a lay of the land, you know, just to sort of see what's out there and what people are charging for it.
Right.
And if you're into the silkscreen stuff, a lot of you know, quote unquote younger collectors are kind of niche collectors. They'll follow a certain band, and there are certain bands that they commission posters for every single show. I mean, there are people who just collect, you know, Dead and Company or Widespread Panic or Fish or Pearl Jam
Or Billy Strings.
or Billy Strings, and you can go on their websites. You can go on their websites and find a lot of the posters because that's they commission them. That's their merch.
Right.
And then you can
right.
get turned on to the artist and go check out the artist site.
Yeah.
Who, just one last quick question. Who are a couple of women artists you would recommend somebody like me diving into their work?
All of them.
Yeah, well, from the 60s, probably the most prolific was Bonnie McLean. And she was married for a period of time to Bill Graham, and she did a lot of Fillmore posters.
Okay.
There was another artist who was less prolific, but really interesting, Mari Tepper. And then there was also a woman who did some early posters. Her name was Donna Herrick, and she ended up doing posters up in Seattle as well when she started doing shows in '68 up there. But yeah, Bonnie McLean, you can probably find a lot of her work.
Okay, thank you.
The reason that I've put our logo up is because we have reached the end of our hour.
And what a great hour it was.
This has been such a fine conversation.
That was
So
fun.
thankful that you guys came and joined us, and I hope you'll come back.
Well, thank you.
Thanks a lot. Sure.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much.
Have a good weekend, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Hey, that was cool.
Yeah, that was fun.
Well, thank you, John.
We'll see you guys.
Okay.
Thanks so much, John.
See you,
Thank you so
Marty.
much.
We'll see you, Ben. Oh, hey, how's Mari?
She's in better health. She's gained 15 pounds.
Good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good. Yeah, I talked to Kelly yesterday, and she was on her way in to talk to her.
Yeah.